Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for all those tuning in. My name is Megan Corrado. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy with the Alliance for Peacebuilding. Although I'm not speaking in this capacity, I also serve as the co-chair of the U.S. Civil Society Working Group on WPS, an amazing network of over 60 organizations working to advance peace and security in the U.S. and globally. Also thrilled to have a few of those members on this panel as well. I'm so thrilled to be with you here on our final day of PeaceCon for this session, Advancing Policy to Practice, Supporting Women Peacebuilders in Afghanistan, the Sahel, and beyond, as we hope to explore some critical opportunities and challenges facing the WPS agenda. Throughout this session, please feel free to drop questions in the room chat located on the right-hand side of your screens. We have a phenomenal lineup of women peacebuilders, advocates, and WPS practitioners with us today. Our speakers include Pawasha Hassan, the Senior Fellow with the Georgetown Institute on Women, Peace, and Security, Teresa Cassalli, the Deputy Executive Director with Minas List, Maureen Farouk, the Director of Program Quality and Learning and Peace and Security Technical Director with Counterpart International, and Zora Sahel, the Gender Specialist with DAI, currently working on USAID's Community Resilience Activity in Pakistan. We come to this moment and this panel at a pivotal moment for the WPS agenda. 21 years after the landmark UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which formalized the agenda, significant obstacles remain in its implementation globally. In the United States, we have the WPS Act of 2017, the WPS Strategy, and the agency implementation plans for the Departments of State, Defense, Homeland Security, and USAID. However, we are not seeing the gains that law and policy promised. As we know, evidence demonstrates that including women in peace processes can lead to more sustainable peace and durable outcomes, yet their engagement is often superficial, if not entirely lacking. The recent failure to advance WPS in Afghanistan looms large in terms of the legitimacy of an international commitment to the agenda. We will take a deep dive into the situation facing our Afghan sisters, who have done and continue to do the hard work despite facing over 4 decades of violence and conflict. But today, let us reaffirm our commitment to stand shoulder to shoulder with them and to stay in the fight to preserve and advance their rights and freedoms. More broadly and too often, WPS is siloed away from other considerations of security and foreign assistance policies. WPS itself is often siloed in relation to broader gender policies. We need to be concurrently talking about WPS, SGBV, sexual and reproductive health, child marriage, education, economic empowerment, and beyond. These issues are all connected and essential to global peace, security, and development. There are no shortage of U.S. government and global government officials working diligently to advance this agenda and championing gender issues, and we appreciate the gender advisors operating globally for their tireless efforts. We don't need to convince them the merits of the WPS agenda. Our work, however, is cut out for us in ensuring that WPS is integrated into all government-wide strategies related to defense and security, diplomacy, and development, and that it is a key consideration in cross-cutting issues such as responses to public health crises, such as COVID, as well as climate change, democratic backsliding, and increasing violent extremism. We must also continue to strive to ensure more robust funding, staffing, and additional resources to give our governments and implementers the tools they need to successfully implement the agenda. Today, we will review a number of case studies that represent the significant strides and challenges in implementing WPS agenda globally, as well as take a 30,000-foot view of where the agenda sits today and explore how we can move it forward. This session will include both policy and programmatic considerations, surface challenges and successes in specific contexts, and outline a roadmap to advance WPS in the days, weeks, and years ahead. Panelists will reflect on case studies including Afghanistan, the Sahel, Pakistan, and more, and explore opportunities for the international community to more effectively support the meaningful engagement and leadership development of women in conflict and crisis prevention, mitigation, and resolution activities. This is critical at a time when climate change, political instability, and rising violence have created additional hurdles for women's inclusion. It is my pleasure at this time to turn it over to the panelists. First one up will be Pawasha Hassan. As noted, she's a senior fellow with the Georgetown University Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, and a former fellow with our partners at the United States Institute of Peace. Pawasha is a dedicated women's rights activist and pioneered many critical works to promote women's rights and civil society in Afghanistan. She co-founded a visionary women's rights movement in Afghanistan, many of us know, the Afghan Women's Network, which has played a pivotal role in women's rights advocacy for the last 26 years. She led several initiatives and project teams that supported women's rights laws in Afghanistan and provided direct services to women and children. In 2005, she was one of the women nominees for the Nobel Peace Prize, as well as one of the finalists for the Sakharov Prize for Freedom and Thought by the European Parliament for her outstanding contribution in support of human rights and freedom of expression. Recently, Pawasha received the Hillary Rodham Clinton Award for exceptional leadership and dedication to human rights and women's rights. Pawasha has had a traumatic and challenging few months, like too many of our Afghan sisters, but we cannot be more grateful that she is here with us today to share her journey, her experiences over decades of tireless work championing women's rights, and her thoughts on the way forward. Pawasha, over to you.
Thank you, Megan. That has been a very generous introduction. I'm pleased to be with all of you this morning and share some of our experience on the ground in Afghanistan and the journey of migration in a very unexpected and difficult circumstances. When we are talking about women, peace and security agenda in Afghanistan, you cannot divorce the women's situation from this all. Not that women have been victim all this time, but a very positive side of the history of Afghanistan in sowing the seeds of peace from very small and community level work that women have been doing in Afghanistan and also in refugee community. For instance, the organization that I've been working in Afghanistan has started 30 years back when we were refugee in Pakistan. So women, despite of a very difficult and tough circumstances, set up their own organization long before the coming of international community in support of Afghan women, because a lot of time we don't give the credit that Afghan women has gone through the struggle for their identity, for building their resilience, and developing agenda where they could be considered as equal citizen in the country. Unfortunately, this has always been challenged. And women issue has always been very politicized in Afghanistan and internationally. So in 2001, with the U.S. Intervention in Afghanistan, the military, women were associated like liberation of women, and that has its own backlashes each time. This kind of agenda has been associated with very genuine and organic movement of that women themselves have started, has been undercredited. For the peace, I just want to remind everybody that Afghan Women Network, it is 26th year since Beijing conference that has been started by a group of women, where I've been one of the co-founders, has started with a women agenda for peace in Afghanistan and try to break that silo of small service delivery at the community level and to try to mobilize women around the bigger agenda to change what was going on in Afghanistan around consolidation of extremism. In the fight for freedom in the country. This group has worked on a peace agenda for many years. And when we were in Afghanistan and world was thinking that military solution is not anymore successful in Afghanistan, women has been much prior to that organizing, mobilizing themselves to see how women can contribute and how they can influence for an Afghanistan which is inclusive of all ethnicities, but gender inclusion be a stronger component of peace in Afghanistan. And since then, several initiatives has been taken by women. Every peace jirga, which is the Grand Council and traditionally owned by elderly men or traditional men, has been penetrated by women through their activism. And we made that breakthrough that in every other jirga, women were part of it. And even this has had influence cross-border. In 2009, when there was the first Afghanistan-Pakistan peace jirga, women in Afghanistan has put a lot of efforts to make sure that women are part of this jirga. And in the last moment, this has influenced the Pakistani delegation, who added 4 women to come to Afghanistan as a part of their delegation. And I think this has been strong, and the way we can influence each other and build that alliances across the border. There have been several other initiatives by women being part of Sahel South Asian for Human Rights. I've been working with a lot of strong Pakistani, Indian, and other South Asian women who are committed to human rights and women rights, and believe on equality of human. Doesn't consider border as an obstacle. We are working together. Women Regional Network is another network. But inside Afghanistan, we have been mobilizing every other event to make sure that women are included. We have changed a lot of narrative, which was always of thinking that women, since they were not part of the conflict, they cannot be part of the peace. But we say it like peace is about present, peace is about future, and women have better ideas for all these years, being involved in community development and educating their children, prevailing health support to other families and women themselves. These are all the contributor for a positive and forward-looking Afghanistan. And taking that as our strength, we have been pushing in every structure that was built on the name of women. So we had 4 women in the negotiation team, which was selected in early 2019 when the U.S. peace process led or facilitated peace process has been started. And also all other structure like High Peace Council, and then Reconciliation Council, we in all this had women in a very high level. And I think for a traditional society like Afghanistan, this came not with any outsider push, but through the women's own struggle inside Afghanistan, because the peace process, unfortunately, which was facilitated by US, women were not encouraged to participate in a lot of activities which was going in Doha. And there was no facilitation for women to. For several times, we has organized our own delegation to go to Doha, speak directly with Taliban, share their own stance. Not that they were asking for their rights, but to tell them, like, we are here, we are half of the population, and we have our own rights, how to see the future of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, women were seen as a spoiler of the process. There was no support given to women. A lot of laws has been involved in that peace process, which led to a very sort of unsuccessful acts or deal between US and Taliban, and a lot of leverages that people of Afghanistan and women could have had was given like as a present to Taliban just for the trading off for safe withdrawal of international troops from Afghanistan, who were not even involved in the combat for last 2 years. And that was a big given to Taliban, which made a big imbalance of the symmetry which could have existed between Afghan government, Islamic Republic then, and Emirates, those who are Taliban who were siding on Emirates. So that created a lot of chaos inside the country. Taliban has supported military or went for the military conquer rather than giving peace a chance so that inter-Afghan dialogue could be successful. Unfortunately, on 15 August, we saw the results, and the whole state system was collapsed, and Taliban took over the power. And here we see in the last 6 months, unfortunately, women are totally neglected or taken out of the public scene. Women are not, who were compromising a big chunk of the civil servants are no more working. Secondary school for girls are closed. Although Taliban are saying now that maybe next year some school will start, but there have been a big distance between the promises or the vows that they have put in the Doha agreement versus or them later on that they said what there will be amnesty. A lot of Afghan who worked in the previous government are not safe. We are hearing the news of every day somebody being killed. And unfortunately, even now, we have at least 3 women and a man among the activists who has been detained, and we don't know where they are. Women in streets of Kabul are putting demonstration together. They have very strong voice. The younger generation of Afghanistan are very strong group, and they are asking for the release. And so is the diaspora and people who has recently left Afghanistan, that we are asking freedom of speech should be not the reason for women to be behind the bar. And for an inclusive Afghanistan, we need everyone to be there, part of the system, and women's rights need to be respected. And this is happening in a situation where more than 20 million of people are facing famine and are in immediate need of humanitarian assistance. In this situation, not involving women is a big flaw. Women rights and respect is not only important because women should be, it is because Afghanistan needs their participation to reach every other family in Afghanistan. We had in 2001 a statistics of 2 million widows or head of household who are women alone. And since then, war has never stopped. We have a lot of women who are the only supporter for their family. If they don't have work, where they go? And if this is a situation where government is not taking responsibility for delivering services to people who are in immediate need of food on their tables, this is extremely difficult situation. So we do need to support Afghanistan. We have to find ways where women in particular be involved in delivery of aid to those who are in need. So we consider women as necessity, not just like only on the basis of lip service or symbolic right for women. So I stop here, and I know that, I think I forget one important thing where the connection with our international partners come about. And that is where we, prior to Taliban overcome in Kabul in August, we have been working on a bigger delegation of women to go to Turkey in that time, because a Turkey conference was in plan, and we wanted, we're planning to have around 100 women go from around Afghanistan and from diverse group of women to represent what they want to, what is their vision for a future in Afghanistan, what is their perspective of peace in Afghanistan, and to have the chance to speak to both sides of the negotiation table, but also the international interlocutors who are involved in peace. So the women recommendation has been huge in Kabul. Unfortunately, till the last moment, women were not allowed. Taliban didn't participate in that meeting, and women were not given that space to come and speak what they wanted from, what were their expectations from the meeting in Turkey and onward in Doha and elsewhere. The women recommendation has been a huge and very comprehensive that included governance, how it should look like, how the ceasefire should be monitored, what are the fundamental rights and freedom that women are looking, monitoring and evaluation of peace agreement, the constitutional reforms, what were perspective of women, what are women legal rights under Islam, and what were the women's suggestion about it, transitional justice, reintegration of Taliban, demobilization of people who are militarized or have weapon, women political participation. All of them were discussed in a very big detail, and it was month of Ramadan last year that women were collecting all these thoughts till late in the fasting month. Unfortunately, all these kind of preparation that women had and been vocal on it were never given a chance to be part of any process. I think I will repeat what Mahbouba said. We cannot change what has happened, but we can work forward with a new way to make Afghanistan an inclusive Afghanistan and include women views and thoughts in the process. Thank you.
Pawasha, thank you so much for that presentation and for everything you've done. We just so appreciate you and appreciate your time here today. Our next speaker is Teresa Cassalli. She's the Deputy Executive Director with Minas List. She's a policy and advocacy specialist with over 12 years of experience advocating to the U.S. government, United Nations, World Bank, and other global entities. Before joining Minas List, she served as a global policy advocate at the International Center for Research on Women, where she helped launch and manage the Coalition for Women's Economic Empowerment and Equality, served as a legislative chair of the U.S. Civil Society Working Group on WPS, and managed the Feminist UN Campaign. Prior to working on global gender equality, she gained policy advocacy experience on issues related to humanitarian emergency assistance, food and water security, global health, refugee issues, and peace building and conflict transformation. With a specialty in the U.S. Congress, Teresa has helped create, support, and pass multiple critical pieces of legislation, including the Women's Entrepreneurship and Economic Empowerment Act, known as the WE Act, as well as the WPS Act, and helped draft the Afghan Women in Negotiations Act. Teresa, I know you've been in the trenches for a long time on these issues, so really appreciate your work, the work of Minas List, what you all have been doing, particularly in the last months, but really for years. So really looking forward to your presentation and thoughts on sort of where do we go now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan, and thank you, Pawasha. And you know, I'm cognizant that there are two speakers on this particular case study, but we felt that it was important to have the Afghan experience represented as well as the American experience, given how deeply implicated the U.S. is by the situation that has unfolded in Afghanistan. And with that really comes the need to take responsibility. So I'm speaking in my capacity as an American, but also as an advocate for women's rights everywhere, of course, especially in Afghanistan, and a practitioner of the WPS agenda. So when it comes to the agenda, as it applies to Afghanistan, you're absolutely right, Megan, in that the failures that happened in Afghanistan loom large, very, very large right now, and it's very raw currently. But on lessons learned, it's also important to talk about what went right. And a lot of that has been eclipsed by crisis and what has ultimately been a horrific outcome. But like Pawasha was telling us, there were efforts that went into peacemaking. There was global solidarity that did exist. And there was so much preparation and support and organizing that did happen. So just a little bit about Minas List as a background and to back up. Like Pawasha said, there is such a long and rich history of Afghan women organizing and uniting for peace and women's rights and political participation, which are all truly connected to each other and not seen as separate, of course. Minas List has been fortunate enough to be a small part of that. When our founder, Tanya Henderson, started the organization to support women to run for public office in countries where women's rights are marginalized, and began with the help from many like Palwasha, who was a founding board member in Afghanistan. So we ran programs in 2014, 2018, training candidates who ran on a women's rights and peace platform through a mentorship program and an app that helped women build networks, connect, fundraise, and manage their campaigns from their phones, all through secure blockchain technology. So when the peace process was announced in 2019 and 2020, as Palwasha said, the women immediately began organizing all throughout the country and knew that they needed a seat at the table. They immediately began warning that a rushed, one-sided, unconditional withdrawal would have disastrous consequences. And we heard a lot about the incredible organizing that happened on the Afghan side, but internationally, there was a lot of solidarity and organizing happening as well. So again, that's where groups like Minas List come in. And what was activated were really networks where women's groups in Afghanistan and women's groups globally were already in close collaboration with each other, began even more concerted efforts to collaborate, and whole coalitions across the world were born based on that solidarity, but also where there was strategic advantage as well, knowing that women leaders of networks in Afghanistan needed to be communicating with allies in the United States, Europe, and the UK, elsewhere globally. And also, as Palwasha alluded to, while all of that was happening, of course, at the official process, at the negotiating table, there was not a lot of solidarity happening. And the women were being systemically sidelined. So the Doha process was underway, but there was no official mechanism for ensuring women's voices fed into the process. And once the very flawed deal between the US and the Taliban was in place, which is really a whole other panel that we could spend discussing that, and the intra-Afghan process began. Fortunately, there was, like Pal said, 4 very well-equipped women on the official Afghan team, but 4 out of 21 is hardly parity, especially when trying to resolve one of the most gendered conflicts in the world. And additionally, those 4 women really carried the weight of the world on their shoulders, and they were sidelined within their own team. Again, there was no mechanism for women's perspectives from the ground, from communities all across the country with lived experience to know what was needed for peace to feed into those process. So Minas List began making plans to convene a parallel peace process or women's peace forum in Doha, especially after women leaders in Afghanistan, like Palwasha was saying, were turned away from the official process multiple times. To be honest, we had high hopes when the Biden administration was elected that things would change, that there would be more openings for women to be involved in the US-led process. So when it was announced that the peace process, which had been lagging and was up against a hard deadline set by the Trump administration, was announced, we saw a window of opportunity and acted quickly. Fortunately, an international consortium came together. So along with Minas List, we had USIP, CourtAid, NDI, Search for Common Ground, or FBA, and FBA, or the Folk Bernadette Academy. We worked with the Afghan Women's Network and the Afghan Women's Educational Center, and they, on the ground, identified and gathered the 100 diverse women delegates that Palwasha was talking about. And they represented 25 provinces from across Afghanistan. They were all known peace builders and activists in their communities. It was a very consultative, democratic, yet not easy selection process. The delegates were then organized into groups based on each issue area that we knew was on the agenda for the official talks, such as ceasefire, potential power sharing agreements, etc., but also additional topics that were important to the women, such as constitutional reform, disarmament and reintegration, trauma healing, and victims' rights. As plans came together, support for the initiative grew. And this was really the extraordinary part. The Afghan government, the US government, and shout out to our incredible colleagues at the Office of Global Women's Issues and the newly formed White House Gender Policy Council, governments of European countries, and our UN colleagues at UNAMA and UN Women were all wonderfully supportive. The plan was to develop recommendations and conditions in each of the groups by topic areas, then meet with the official negotiating teams to deliver their demands and red lines. The women assembled in Kabul from all over the country. Our founder and executive director, Tanya, and I flew to Istanbul for the meeting, along with other colleagues in the consortium, and other colleagues were on their way. But by the time we landed, like Palwasha said, the Taliban announced that they were boycotting, and the process would at least be delayed. The women's visas were denied yet again, especially because all of this was happening against the backdrop of COVID, which significantly complicated things. So with hopes of merely a delay, we whittled down our list. And in the middle of that process, President Biden gave his speech and made the announcement of a full and unconditional withdrawal by September 11th. And essentially the process was over. Us Westerners went home. However, as we heard from Pal, the Afghan women delegates did not. They stayed in Kabul. They met in their strategic groups. They put their recommendations together anyway. Fortunately, we were able to have that extraordinary document that is available to our audience, actually, that we can share. And we did share it throughout the US government, and we were met with lots of listening ears, lots of interest. But at this point, we don't think it made much of a difference. So what would have happened if they made it to the table? We'll never truly know. What we do know is that it might have turned up the heat on the negotiators at least a bit. Minas List was fortunate enough to have a conversation with our advisory board member and feminist professor, Cynthia Enlow, about this recently. We told her the story and everything that we had planned and everything that went right and the solidarity that did exist in the group leading up to this extraordinary moment, and asked her what she thought could have happened. And she gave a measured response, again, because we can't really know. But she says that she knows it would have at least added another level of accountability for the male negotiating team members, that they would have felt more scrutinized, under the spotlight for making no commitments on women's empowerment, representation, and their security. And I'd also add on top of adding to the pressure of the male negotiators, it would have better supported the women negotiators. And again, civil society would have felt more heard and seen, and would have able to have been to feed into the process. And maybe that would have changed some of the terms of peace agreement and gotten us closer to finalizing one in the first place. And if we had a peace agreement, even an imperfect one, we'd certainly be better off than we are now. Afghan women were never asking the United States to continue their military presence forever, but they were asking for a chance at peace and at least a framework to give that a chance. So I don't have a lot of complicated policy prescriptions on the way forward, other than listen to women. It's never too late. Like Pal was saying, this humanitarian disaster absolutely still requires that women be a part of it, that they be able to lead, and that they, on a very, very practical level, not just about their right to be able to lead, they have to be able to be a part of it so they can access women-headed households and women and girls in the communities who are most in need. Also for the US, and I'm certainly not the only one saying this, we need to critically examine how we end wars. Again, there are lots of complicated policy prescriptions out there on how to do that. But my recommendation is quite simple. The rallying cry in the headlines for leaving Afghanistan was this noble sounding cause of ending the forever war. But we didn't ask ourselves, ending the forever war for who? At home, we're in the middle of a racial justice movement that is saying, center the voices of those most affected if we want to move forward. And that applies in foreign policy as well, and was really, really the missing piece of our strategic disengagement. You can't end wars without building peace for those most affected, with those most affected. And you can't build peace, or an effective peace certainly, without listening to women. So that still needs to be the way forward. Thank you.
Teresa, thank you so much for that really powerful summation of not only your work, but sort of the way things went wrong, what could have happened, and how we need to move forward. Really appreciate that. So our next speaker is Maureen Farouk. She is the Director of Program Quality and Learning at Counterpart International and is an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. She specializes in countering violent extremism, community-based resiliency models, and strengthening women's roles in peace and security. Maureen brings over a decade of field-based technical expertise, providing governmental and non-governmental actors with needs assessment, community engagement, strategic guidance for project implementation, and training to improve public policy and programming to advance peace and security. Maureen is having a bit of technical difficulty, so she may need to be off camera, but over to you, Maureen, and fingers crossed. Maureen, we can't hear you. Just give you 1 second to try and connect. Of course, the challenges with a virtual platform, Maureen lost power about 10 minutes ago. So she is trying to connect as quickly as she can. Okay, I see she dropped off. She's going to try and pop back in. So at this point, why don't we turn it over to Zora Sahel? She works as a gender specialist at USAID's Community Resilience Activity in Pakistan. She leads the integration of gender in the project and provides advisory support on gender to all 6 clusters of the program. Her efforts primarily focus on creating conditions to increase the participation of women in countering violent extremism and building implementing partners' capacity on gender. She previously worked as a gender and social inclusion specialist on an FCDO-funded democracy and elections program, which DAI implemented. Zora is a passionate proponent of women's rights and inclusive development, both of which have been central to her academic and professional pursuits. And we are delighted to hear about her exceptional work advancing WPS in the field in Pakistan. Over to you, Zora.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see my screen. Thank you.
It's all black right now. Maybe just give it 1 moment. There we go.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Megan. I'm Zora Sohail, and I'm the gender specialist at USAID Pakistan's Community Resilience Activity South, which is being implemented by DAI. And today I'm going to discuss our experience of engaging women in peace building in select areas of Pakistan. So I'll move forward. A quick introduction of our program. CRS South is a 5-year USAID-funded project that focuses on preventing and countering violent extremism. The program aims to increase tolerance, social cohesion, and resilience in target communities. The program works in select regions of Sindh and South Punjab in Pakistan. Since the beginning, the program had 2 objectives. It was to enhance tolerance within and across communities and to increase broad-based citizen engagement in community decision-making. Recently, since 2020, the program added the 3rd objective, understanding and addressing gender roles in violent extremism and countering violent extremism. As we at DI felt that it's very important that we actively engage women in peace building, and to that it's very important that we increase our focus towards women, peace and security, and that's why we added a 3rd objective. As within this objective, we aim to focus on gender dynamics and especially to focus on the role of women in peace building and to enhance that. Our approach towards engaging women to counter violent extremism was that firstly, we realized that there is limited research on the role of women, gender in VE and CVE and the role of women in VE and CVE in Pakistan, especially in our hyper-local target areas. So we commenced a study on the issue. Secondly, we strengthened the role of women in CVE through women-focused grants. Now, these are women-only grants where women participate and are designed in consultation with women, and the idea is to give women maximum opportunities to participate in peace building and to also make all the other grants gender sensitive and inclusive to ensure that they are conducive for women's participation. Today in my discussion, I'll be focusing on 2 lines of effort. First, participation, and second, partner capacity. A little bit of context of participation. Pakistan has experienced insecurity and internal instability due to prevalence of violent extremist organization. While extremist organizations are actively influencing and recruiting both men and women, the PCV efforts by both the government and donors have mainly engaged men. Predominantly, it's also important to note at this point that Pakistan is predominantly a very conservative country, especially the target areas where we work in. They are very traditionally very conservative, with very rigid social cultural norms. These social cultural norms often limit women's mobility outside their homes, their participation in activities which are not related to family activities in the public sphere. Now, we have to understand at this point that due to social cultural norms, often do not even engage with other women in their community who are different from them, who are not from the same family, from the same, sometimes they're not from the same religion, from the same sect, from the same ethnicity. So there's very limited interaction between women women from the same, who even living in the same area. And often because of these lack of interaction, there's a lot of stereotypes, there's a lot of discrimination, there's a lot of intolerance towards each other. Secondly, we also have to note at this point is that traditionally decision-making and conflict resolution, especially at the community level, has been led by men in Pakistan. So traditionally, women have not been included into decision-making at the community level or conflict resolution at the community level. And often we see even decision-making at the household level is largely predominantly led by men. So women have very limited space to participate in decision-making, and they traditionally had almost no opportunities to participate in conflict resolution. Moving forward through our program, we have been successful in engaging a diverse group of women, ranging from students, teachers, universities, from non-mature institutes like madrasas, vocational institutes, community influential women, community women, parliamentarians, farmers, and artists. When I say community influential women, what we mean is women who have influence in the community. This could be because of their age, their education, their occupation, their family, lots of reasons. There could be teachers, there could be community leaders, there could be community religious teachers, etc. So moving forward, so to engage women, we had to do certain things which were key to our approach and strategy to engaging women in peace building in a place where historically, traditionally, women were not engaged in this activity. So first of all, we realized that it's very important that the implementing partner who's engaged in implementing activities around peace building and providing trainings on the ground level is considered credible. They have by not only by the women but also by the larger community, especially the community influential men and community leaders. Secondly, they have the right outreach and networks, because it's very difficult for somebody who doesn't have the right outreach and networks within the community to go in a community and especially engage with women. So it's very important they have the right networks, they are trusted by the community, and the community implementing partners team is not only from the community or from a neighbor community. They also have majority of women, because if if a team goes in the community and they have majority of men, or they don't have majority of women, or not all women, then often they're unable to interact, or community does not allow them to interact with women. Secondly, it's very important that we conduct a thorough gender analysis of the area with our target group, understand the intergender power dynamics. It's very important to understand the gender norms there, the practices, the attitudes, before designing any activity, any peace building activity for the area, or any CVE activity or training for that area. It's very important that we know what the dynamics are, who we have to engage prior to engaging women, who we have to talk to, how should we engage women, what are the suitable timings for them, what are the constraints, what is the initial education level and exposure, so that we can modify our content according to that, etc. Secondly, before engaging women in any community, it's very important that we conduct orientation sessions and sensitization sessions with community influential and gatekeepers, especially including the male leaders of the community, the male household heads of the community, from that community. And once they trust the activity, once they start understanding the activity and its importance, then they encourage women's participation, and their support is very key for women's participation in any activity, especially activities regarding to peace building and conflict resolution, as traditionally women were not part of it. It's very important that they understand and value women's participation in peace building and conflict resolution. Fourth, it's very important that our capacity building sessions are tailor-made. A one-size-fits-all approach does not work. The capacity building sessions or the trainings have to be tailor-made according to the group of women we are engaging, based on the context, the social cultural context, the overall dynamics of the group, their understanding on base understanding on the issue, the timing that suit them, the language which is required for the training, the examples we should include in them. So it's very important. In our experience, we've realized that when people relate to the examples, then it's much easier for them to grasp them, understand them, and later on implement them. Additionally, we after training, it's very important that the people that we've trained in the community, the women that we plan social action projects with them. The small projects that are led by the women that we engage in our activities. They're led by the women who are trained, and provide them an opportunities to practically implement what they've learned through the capacity building sessions. So through the social action projects, they not only get a chance to re-emphasize and reiterate what they've learned and practically implement it, but also provides them with an exposure and confidence to opportunity to implement activity which builds their confidence with regards to peace building and peace building activities. So in future, once the activity ends, they can take things forward. In these social action projects, often the peace building, the CVE content or the peace building messages are often reinforced, re-emphasized through interactive ways, through theater performances, through sports activities, through food festivals, through other activities which are aligned with social cultural norm, which women really enjoy, and to enjoying participating in activities, they re-emphasize on what they've learned. And once they work together as a team, they also start the idea of the other changes, and they start viewing each other as colleagues, as team members, as a friend. Lastly, we provide a platform for regular engagement on CVE, as currently we realize that there's a lack of platforms, and once we provide them with platform where they can come together regularly, engage on the issues and talk about the divisive narrative in the communities and how they can be countered, it's really effective in promoting peace. Second thing that we focused on is building partner capacity. As I earlier mentioned that in Pakistan, traditionally, historically, women were not actively engaged in CVE and promoting peace. So there were limited focus at both the national and local levels on engaging women to counter violent extremism and promote peace. Likewise, there was limited understanding on the importance of role of women and the diverse roles and diverse ways women can contribute. Often when we used to talk to our partners about the role of women in peace building, be it the government partners or the implementing partners who are CSOs, the only role that they would mostly talk about was the role of women as mothers. While that's important, the role of women as mothers to counter violent extremism and promote peace building in the household, it's very important that we also leverage women's role as community influential women, as parliamentarians, as community women, as teachers, as students, etc. So it's very important that they understood that these roles. So there was currently very limited understanding on these roles. Fourthly, the government issues, both the government institutes and the implementing partners. When I say implementing partners, I mean CSOs, who historically traditionally worked on women issues or women-related issues, traditionally did not work on CVE. And those that worked on CVE did not engage women. There was a gap there. Likewise, there was lack of female trainers on CVE. And in our experience, we realized that it's very important that women majority trainings are actually led by female trainers, as women can easily ask questions, they feel more comfortable, and they're always more effective. So there was a lack of female CVE trainers. Our approach and strategy to address that, we first of all conducted capacity building sessions of men who've been parliamentarians CVE. And within the CVE session, in capacity building session, we embedded sessions to emphasize on the role of women in PCVE. And within this session, we highlighted various roles in which women could participate and promote peace building and work as peace builders at a community level, at district level, at a provincial and national level. We also engaged key women-related government institutes on PCVE, and provided them with capacity building sessions and connected them with trained women, community influential women at the ground level. So there was a connection between them and bridged the gap between them. So they were not only more connected with women who were working in peace building at a ground level, but we also worked to increase their understanding in how they could support these women to counter violent extremism and promote peace. When I say women-related government institutions, some of the institutions that we are working with include the Punjab Women Protection Authority, Women Development Department, Commission of Status Women, etc. In certain cases, we supplemented the PC with training for government institute with training on women in leadership, to provide the key members, to women members of the institute, certain institutes with more skills on negotiation, communication, which could further help them with conflict resolution and working at both the national level and at the community level. We also conduct training of trainers to create a pool of female CVE trainers, and lastly, we worked actively to build implementing partners and CEOs who are working with us, their understanding on role of women in CVE. However, in our work, we experienced a lot of challenges, and some of the challenges included that there was limited hyperlocal evidence on engaging women on CVE. So there was limited evidence on what are the best ways on engaging women on CVE, what are the best mechanisms, what are the best platforms, etc. So there was limited hyperlocal evidence. Secondly, there was also this vision, as I earlier mentioned, around participation of women in activities. There was a vision on why we are engaging with women and why are we engaging them on CVE or on issues which they were not traditionally engaged on. There was a vision around them, which often women would not get permission to participate in these activities. So that's why we started working closely with the community men and had conducted training sessions with them, orientation sessions with them, trainings with them, etc. Thirdly, often, unfortunately, the role of women in CVE and conflict was often unfathomable by the community. As I mentioned earlier, traditionally, women were not part of CVE or conflict resolution. Effort had to be put in to build their understanding of why it's very, very, very important to engage women on CVE. Fourthly, there were stringent beliefs of women. Once they would come to activities, there were stringent beliefs around them about interacting with women from other sects or other religions. And one of our ideas was to bring everyone together, provide one platform to come together, work together, and to promote tolerance, promote harmony. So initially, there would be stringent beliefs and about interacting with people for different. So we had to really work towards making sure that the training environment is positive, it's conducive, and slowly they start interacting with each other and design activities in a way that they work with each other towards common goals and start viewing each other as partners, as trainers, as team members, as colleagues. Lastly, due to minimal in our target areas, women often did not go to school, or they have very little education or exposure, so they were unable to connect with concept of CVE, especially with regarding how their daily conversations, daily the attitudes, practices, the stereotypes in the community are actually contributing towards divisiveness in the larger community, and how they can potentially lead to conflict, and how it's important to work on positive narratives. So that was they were often unable to connect with them, so they've had to really make sure that we use the right examples, the right content there to make sure that they can easily understand and implement. Some of the lessons that we learned through our work was that once community influential women are trained, they very, very, very effectively leverage their private network to spread positive narratives. For example, once we trained teachers from the local schools on CVE, they not only spread positive narratives in the schools and the students, but also when they engage with parents, they spread positive narratives, and they really promote peace and tolerance through their engagement. Second thing we learned was that in a community where women are traditionally not engaged in conflict resolution, women not only require extensive capacity building on the issue, but often we also have to work closely with men and sensitize them on the issue. So they work very closely with women, and they support their role in their participation in conflict resolution as that. So basically, it will require work on both ends. One, engaging women, providing them with training, exposure, confidence, CV skills. Second, working with men and to make sure that they support women's role in the CVE. Secondly, thirdly, women-only safe spaces are very important because these spaces are when women come together, they talk to each other, they share their experience, and they promote dialogue and CVE. Lastly, to encourage women's participation in activities, often engaging women role models and community influencers is very useful. Because once the community sees that women who they consider as role models or community influencers, when they are engaging in activity, then other women become much easier for other women to get permission or the families to support their participation in the activities. Some of our best practices based on our experience. First of all, we realized that it's very important that the activities designs are consultative and flexible. So once it's consultative, there's greater ownership, and once it's greater ownership, there's greater participation. Secondly, it's very important to be flexible because once it's flexible, it considers the key constraints of women in the community, and once it considers the constraints and it's flexible, then it's more conducive to the participation. Secondly, multi-rate programming with repeated engagement is very useful. One-time engagement with women on CVE is not sufficient to support their role in peace building. It's very important that we repeatedly engage with them. And one of the things which worked very well for our mentorship approach, where if in one activity we engage women on CVE and we train them, then in the following activity we engage them as mentors, where they help us train other women in the community. They support them, training of this community or engaging, mobilizing other women. So that not only benefits the women mentors who not get opportunity to re-emphasize or refresh what they've learned and practically implement it, but often the people who are participating in those activities, they feel much more comfortable as they see their communities, influential women and community influencers as mentors, and they can directly take guidance from them and learn from them and engage with them. So that helps in both ways. Thirdly, we realize that often it's much easier for women to get permission to and support from the family to participate in activities, if CVE-related activities, if we couple them with vocational skills training. So that really helps because the family often see that benefit that women will go there and learn vocational skills, and that can help them with economic uplift of the household or provide them with employment opportunities. Fourthly, as I mentioned, and I guess I mentioned a couple of times, it's very important that we have male support group or orientation for men in the community, because that's often very key for women participation in any activity. Lastly, it's very important to integrate gender in the entire grant or activity cycle, as that really helps with supporting women's participation in the activity. A quick overview of how we integrate gender in activity and grant cycle is that at the pre-award design stage, we conduct a gender analysis. We have a gender inclusivity checklist, which ensures that our partners have the right outreach network experience in the community. Gender analysis, which helps us learn about intergender power dynamics in the community and what will work, what won't work. We conduct a gender review of the grant design. We conduct gender review of all communication material, including training materials, any scripts being used, any talking points, everything being used in the grant. We conduct gender review of it to make sure it's gender sensitive, it has the right examples, it's inclusive, it's actually communicating with the people it's intended to communicate with. We also emphasize a lot on sex disaggregated reporting, as that really helps us learn what has worked, what has not worked, and what will work if we engage women and our lessons learned. We simultaneously work on capacity building of implementing partners, which through grantee review sessions, kickoffs, having sessions on gender in our grantee review sessions, in the activity kickoff, and we often have periodic sessions with our partners on gender integration. To conclude, in our experience, we've seen it's very, very, very important to engage women in counter-violent extremism. And to do that, it's very important that we thoroughly understand gender dynamics of the area and keep those in mind while designing activities, as that really helps us with designing activities and strategies which make the peace building activities more conducive for women's participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zora. Really appreciate that. You highlighted a couple of very interesting issues and approaches. I really appreciated your point about how women are not a monolith, and it's really important both in programming and policy to recognize. Oh, sorry. It's really important to recognize that women are not a monolith. They have different needs, perspectives, backgrounds, status, identities. abilities, etc. So that was really helpful, I think, because too often in WPS agenda at a negotiation table or other activity, it's like, oh, we have a woman, and that we have the tokenism that too often results, and they think that they're totally representative of all women, which is clearly not the case. I see Maureen here, hoping maybe that she can connect with us. Maureen, are you here? Sorry, Maureen, we're not being able to hear you right now. Maybe we'll give her a chance to pop out and pop back in. Move along to some of our questions, and we can, I see some are coming in the chat. I have a couple. I'd like to encourage folks to please do add your questions, and I would invite my other panelists to come on video as well. So one really great question I saw was from Nazreen Khan. Thank you so much. I'd like to hear a bit more about the approaches, steps taken in Afghanistan to engage women to participate in the workshops to gather their thoughts on the peace process. Although the contexts are different, could there be lessons to share for Pakistan's engagement of women in CPE? So maybe Palwasha and Teresa, you could dig in on the Afghanistan context, and we can go to Zora. I see you. I can't hear you. There you go. Go ahead, Teresa.
Okay, Megan, actually, can you just repeat the beginning part of the question, please?
Sure. So our audience members would like to hear more about the approaches and steps taken in Afghanistan to engage women to participate in the workshops to gather their thoughts. So a lot of what AWN was facilitating.
That was definitely the AWN and AWEX side. So Pal, I'll let you go ahead and take that.
Sure. I think the workshop that we have been talking about, this is like one of the series of things that we have been doing. But we, AWN, for instance, have had their offices in all over the country, and also a membership of over 3,500 women activists around the country. Over 150 organizations or women groups, and through that has been the way of connecting with women in the community. AWAC also had this local women Peacebuilders network, through which we have been in contact and consultation with women around the country, and through a very sort of what Teresa said, a democratic process. Women have been selected in all these provinces, and they came to Kabul, and then from Kabul we were planning that after a workshop that some of them be able to travel to Turkey, and to present the bigger voice and diverse voice of women around the country in a bigger workshop, which unfortunately didn't happen. But nevertheless, women were able to share their thoughts, to consult each other's views, and to put together recommendations, which have been shared through this Minas List, put an English document together, which has been shared through a link before with the audience here. If that was the question, I don't know. If further question, I will respond.
Yeah, so the link is in the chat, and I think that this document really does still have quite a bit of relevance and lessons to be learned. And I think that, like Palwasha said, the process was was quite democratic in the way that the delegates were chosen. Essentially, the whole network of organizations across the country each got one vote, and they had to pick. a person that they felt was best positioned, that they had the most expertise. And it is really telling and really incredible that even though the official process was canceled and the Americans went home, that, you know, we had 100 women still sitting in Kabul ready to get on a plane, and they said, we're still going to meet. We still have something to say, and we're going to put it on paper. And it took, you know, at least a month to compile everything, to get all of those lessons organized and cleaned up and shared in a presentable format. And we still did send it to every contact we could think of and every government who would listen. And I think that, you know, reading it and still going through, you know, what can be applied to all of these areas that are always relevant to a peace process should still be done. So we're happy to share that, and would love to hear, you know, how other countries and what other contexts could glean from it.
Thank you both. Really appreciate that. I'm going to give Maureen another chance. So it sounds like we can kind of hear her, but there's a bit of a delay. So maybe let's give her a few seconds to chime in, and we'll see if we can make this work, because I know Counterpart does pretty amazing work around around the world, particularly in countries in the Sahel. Oh, and we lost her.
I could hear her for a second.
I know.
I was excited that she was going to
of hope.
come in there.
Yeah. Okay. We'll see if we can get her back. So just go back to Zora for a moment. You know, are there lessons from sort of the work you've been doing on the CVE context? And then, you know, how did you work? You know, you talked about some of the challenges, but how did you able to sort of convince folks from different, you know, identity groups of women to come together and work towards advancing a singular goal of preventing and countering violent extremism?
Thank you, Megan. I'll first talk about how we were able to, in certain areas, convince women to convince families or to actually, you know, support women's participation. In many areas, once we went in, first we implemented activities with men. That really helped us them build that trust with that implementing partner, or trust on the topic, especially what we're talking about. That really helped. So first we went in. So we would never go in a new area and directly engage women. We would always go first and engage men, or in certain cases, if it was a university, would have mixed activities. But in community level, we always engage men first, have men-only activities to build that trust. And often within those activities, we would embed conversations on, sometimes would embed conversations on the role of women in CVE. Often we would see that once that trust is there, once people are finding activities being very useful, in certain communities, demand would come from them that, you know, why don't we engage our women from our community on this topic? It's a very important topic. Sometimes we had to embed conversations, sometimes we had to build trust, but it was very important that first we go in and engage men and build that trust, and then engage women. Secondly, when we went into activity, once women were engaged, when women were engaged in activity, and they were all coming from diverse contexts, and they had always seen each other as the other, right? So to help that, it was very important that we choose the right trainer, and the right trainer, they have the right activities. The activities could be simply, for example, there was a thread activity really helped. You know, they was give a thread to each person and connect, and then tell them, you know, how you all connected. And if one person would drop the thread, they would say, you know, the entire thread's gone down, and you know how the connections dropped. So there was have the small activities, easy to understand, very interactive, have conversations, and then often we would divide them in teams. For example, when you do a food festival, right, we would there are stereotypes around in Pakistan, certain areas around sharing food or eating food which has been cooked by people who are not similar to you, who could be from different background, etc. So we would have food festival. We would team up people who are different, from diverse groups, right? Difference on the right word, from diverse groups. We would team them up and, you know, make them in teams, and they would work together to make food, to eat food. It would be like a festival. Or we would have the small games with them, so they would start viewing each other as team members. The entire idea is once they start coming to come together, once they engage, and once they realize that, you know, we are one community, we are one. So, you know, that's the idea, to bring them together and start a conversation which has never been started with them before. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really, really important approach. Something to think about moving forward in all kinds of contexts. I mean, we know the issue of peaceful masculinities has been something that's been being more and more explored in our field. USIP had some great programming there. Other NGOs have been doing work like women's rights or human rights. I know in Afghanistan and in other places where they go and speak to, tribal leaders, religious leaders, to sort of ground training and these ideas in their particular context. And so, one thing to think about as we move forward with the agenda globally is how can we scale those kinds of activities on a wholesale. Teresa, maybe if I could ask you, we talked a bit about siloing and cross-sectional issues earlier. So what do you think is needed in the US and globally to sort of break down those silos, both within the gender issue, the gender buckets, as well as, foreign assistance, development, humanitarian aid? How can we make sure WPS principles are better integrated across lines of effort?
I think that that's a great question. And I think that that's one that we're always ongoing grappling with. And certainly one of the biggest frustrations, of course, in this line of work is that constant tension between, should gender be its own special area, or should it be just a part of everything else? And I think that the answer really has to be both. For instance, the new special envoy for Afghan women and girls, an incredibly important development for Afghan women and girls, but also just sends a really, really strong signal, right, about the priorities of the U.S. government and the fact that the WPS agenda is hopefully alive and well, and that we are going to apply it in this context. But it's also important that, she not be given the entire responsibility herself to somehow just come in and fix the situation for women and girls in Afghanistan. It has to be the entire government behind her and with her as she drives strategy. Yet again, not alone, not expected to do it simply by herself, because she has that special position, or that specialized position, I should say. So I think also the silos that we create are also a result of the way that we budget. And so I think gender responsive budgeting also has to be something that's integrated, because without the way that we plan to spend for money, the way programs are created are an outflow from there. So gender programs are a good thing, but if we aren't doing, budgeting at the governmental level, at the appropriations level, then things are going to stay in silos forever, just because of the nature of how government works and how, aid gets distributed and implemented. So that's something that I would say as well, is that budgeting always has to be a really important part of how we break down silos in the U.S. government and other governments as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Pawasha, Zora, I just want to give you opportunity to jump in there if you have any thoughts on how we, make WPS more integrated, and so we can apply the lessons we're learning both in real-time peace processes, or lack thereof, in programs.
Yeah, I think to make take a concrete step from rhetoric to actual pragmatic right now. Afghanistan case is the most important, and we have been calling for this for a long time, when we were saying the WPS agenda here in United States, but also 1325 globally, is something that, because more than 43 countries has been involved in Afghanistan, and majority of them have their action plan regarding women, peace and security, or they have national agenda like here in WPS in US. And this is very much relevant context in Afghanistan, and we need more practical steps, because a lot of women see no more value in this unless a real plan is there in place to ensure women's right in countries in conflict are not taken into consideration. Right now, what is going on in Afghanistan is total chaos on the situation of human rights, especially on women's rights. Everybody, especially in Afghanistan, are waiting for international community, especially United States, how they are taking steps that really make difference. We are happy for certain initiative which has been taken, like appointment of Rina Amiri and a team of people who will look to the girls and women's rights situation in Afghanistan. But I think people need more than that, more political as well as maybe support otherwise to make difference on the ground. I think sanctions alone are not useful, especially in situation where people are facing enormous level of hunger and issue. There should be always ways to apply maybe smart sanction instead, and make sure that women and people of Afghanistan don't suffer, but yet not be oversided or isolated, using this as a way that we are helping Afghanistan in a different way.
Thank you both. Appreciate that. So there's a question in the chat asking for you to talk a bit more about the recommendations from the women's delegation to this Afghanistan. Who were they shared with in other governments, and how were the recipients in other governments identified?
Thanks for that excellent question. I should say that, again, we were, after the process was canceled, we were very much working on the fly. It was not a, we had to make up plans on the go and really just try to be responsive to what was in front of us at the time. And, I mentioned the international consortium that had come together to really get these plans off the ground. And that included USIP, NDI, Court Aid, Search for Common Ground. And essentially what we did was just collectively collate all of our contacts. So what that meant was, me reaching out to the US Congress, folks who whatever relationships that they had, just sharing them, and then asking them to also identify who they think in their government they should be sharing with. So, we made a spreadsheet and just tried to hit as many of the international stakeholders as possible that we knew were invested, that we knew were a part of the process, and went from there. And that included multilateral organizations as well, and all the partners and stakeholders within the UN and beyond.
Thanks for that. So a question sort of for everybody, Afghanistan is sort of the living, breathing example of it, but how can practitioners and policymakers work around unanticipated challenges like regime change, which we thought would maybe come, but maybe not as fast as it did? Or, for instance, the military coup, the recent military coup in Burkina Faso. How can we pivot quickly to address the immediate needs and long-term goals in volatile contexts?
I will say that I think that the ability to pivot quickly is definitely a huge challenge. And I think that was, in the context of Afghanistan, definitely a problem, that we needed to be able to come up with new programs overnight, and the funding mechanisms that do exist for being able to do that are very, very limited. So again, it comes back to budgeting and flexible funding. I think without that, it's very, very hard to pivot. There were some mechanisms coming out of the UN, for instance, that wanted to be responsive to a very quick change of plans. But I know Pal Asha has talked about before, and maybe you can say more, Pal, it's just not, the money can't get there fast enough. and that's a very big problem. And the bigger the donor, the harder it is to change direction, even when something happens that's catastrophic at the highest level. So that's something that we definitely need to continue to work on as a sector, and because without that flexibility, it's extremely hard to pivot.
Thank you, Teresa. Yeah, I mean, the budget issue is just so maddening, because I think now, there was so much money put into Afghanistan, at least from the United States in particular, over the last 20 years, not nearly enough, I would argue, on gender issues, although a fair amount, but not necessarily on peace building or women, peace, and security issues. Now, my worry is that the U.S. government and others will take a step back and say, didn't really work out, so maybe we shouldn't be investing huge tranches of funds. And so, we think it is really important for programs that like Zora is running to demonstrate successes, even if it's on a small scale, community scale, grassroots scale, that we can scale them up and are worth investing in. So I think it's going to be an extra challenge for our community to continue to prove the value of investment in WPS.
Absolutely. And can I just build off of that a little bit, Megan? Oh, I'm sorry, Zora. I was just going to say that I think that that's part of one of the reasons that we wanted to tell this story, because, we asked the question of this panel kind of ahead of time to start thinking, what does it mean for the agenda that there was such a large failure? And I don't think that the agenda failed. I think the agenda is sound. It was a failure of governments to implement it, a failure of governments to listen. And I think that we just keep going. We don't give up on the WPS agenda. We say it's more needed than ever. It always will be. And we keep going. And we talk about the successes as much as we can, even though that sometimes isn't as compelling as a panel when it's what did go right. But I think that part is on us to really take on more.
I would just want to add at this point is that it's very, very, very important to demonstrate success, but we might have to redefine what we mean by success, as we can't have just one definition for success. It can't be the same that we use for the activities with men. We have to be cognizant of the fact that women have the unique context, the unique circumstances and dynamics around their engagement. It's very different from dynamics around men's engagement. So what we mean by success, how we measure it, and what we really infer from it will have to differ. We might have to be different. And secondly, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that if we have been engaging men on this issue since so many years, then we can't really, it will be unfair if we measure the women against the same tools or the same definition of success. So that's something we have to keep in mind at all times. And yes, it's very important to demonstrate success, not only at the community level, but at different levels. We have to see demonstrate success when we engage women at different levels, whether it's community influential women or community women or teachers or women from non-mainstream institute, etc. So it's very important but what we mean success will have to be different. Thank you.
And building on the great discussion in the chat, absolutely creating more male gender champions, and because they also have gender, and being able to have them listen. So thank you, John, for that. And John and I worked together in the informal settlements of Nairobi, building peace there after the election violence that took place in 2008. And so he's been also in the trenches, so to speak, building peace from a male point of view. So that's also extremely important to highlight.
Teresa, can I push you and Zora a bit on the work you did with men in fostering gender champions in Kenya and Pakistan?
Sure. So I'll just give a couple of examples. Here is that, for example, we would assume that non-mainstream institutes or which are religious education institutes, they traditionally are very conservative when it comes to very, very strict when it comes to women's engagement in any activity outside the institute. So what we did was that we first engaged male non-mainstream institutes, on the topic, and then we developed a male support group, which included administrators of the non-military institute for women and the male from the male non-military institute, as so often they work together. And once we engaged them, they started supporting women's participation in activities. I wouldn't call them gender champions per se, but I would just say definitely they've started valuing women's participation in peacebuilding activities and started supporting it. And it would encourage us to engage more women. And throughout the process of our engagement of that female non-military institute, they were very supportive. They really helped design activities. They were really interested in it, and they really motivated to, support women's participation. So I think the idea that we worked with them first, and then in our engagement with women, we developed a male support group where we had consultation with them, regular meetings with them, discussed challenges with them. So they took them on board. So they really helped us with those activities.
And I should say too, in the case of Kenya, so this was a program a long time ago that didn't necessarily have a male engagement piece formally, but I think we just had a very special advocate in John Okanga as part of the staff. And so maybe we can do that as a panel next time. I think that would be incredible. But I also know that that Palwasha, if I could just put you on the spot for a second, that there's been a lot of male engagement work also in Afghanistan. And I think sometimes people are surprised to hear that, but it absolutely is true. And there are organizations that have whole programs dedicated to male engagement for gender equality in Afghanistan. And I was just wondering if you could say a little bit about that, since there seems to be interest.
I think for a long time, we have a partnership with men in the community. For instance, I've been working for a long time on equal and just laws for women. And our whole program was based on how to work with men in the community, even mullahs or the religious people, to engage in a discussion with them, to bring that support that women need, because you cannot make change unless you involve men as a part of that change. And this has been realized long in Afghanistan. Whatever projects we were doing, we had a component to work with these tribal men, elderly men in the community, and also young youth. Like, for instance, we had this peace work that we were doing for 1325 in Afghanistan. We were working with young champions who were all young men who were working on women participation in the community, and they had their own social media campaigns for raising awareness and speaking to other men regarding this. I think this made a lot of changes at the community level. If you see right now, Taliban are saying that education is not allowed in communities because this is what the community doesn't want. And now we have a lot of male champions who are coming forward and saying, no, community wants that education. It is you who don't want. They are interacting not in a very controversial way, but very engaging way by recording the voices of community, mobilizing community who are raising voice for girls' education. And this sort of movement has started from south, from village to village, and this is done by men who are championing for women's right to education and girls to education. Artists are drawing paintings, which is reflecting that we want education for girls. So there is tremendous synergy among the male in the community. I think what Taliban are doing is very much political and in response to their own, let's say, foot soldiers who have been trained all this time against a lot of values, which is largely shared or respected in Afghan society, which is pro-girls' education, women's rights, and cultural appropriation is not limited to Taliban. Afghanistan society is generally within cultural norms and Islamic values. But of course, there is misinterpretation of that and misrepresentation of that.
Yep, I think that's spot on. Really appreciate that. So sadly, we are running out of time here. So maybe just quickly, I could ask each of you in 30 seconds to give us a call to action. What can we do? What can our community do? What can implementers do? And this call can be to the donor community, the US government, advocacy organizations. What can we do to support Afghan women, to support Pakistani women working on WPS, and to support the WPS generally? So Teresa, I'll give you first go.
Hard to sum up everything in 30 seconds, and but I think for the U.S. government in particular, it's just let women lead. You know, listen to us, believe us, but let us lead. I think that they are doing a better job of that lately. But we still have so far to go, so far to go. And I think we need to start asking the world and ourselves, why women? Nobody says why men. We're half the population. We're not some niche group that special interest should apply to. So let's just move forward as equal humans. I think that the WPS community, Megan and I, we've discussed this. It was extremely discouraging to be involved as WPS practitioners in the Afghanistan crisis. No more discouraging, of course, than for Afghans themselves. However, I think if we can take inspiration from women like Palasha and others, there's just no giving up. Giving up isn't an option. So let's stop questioning the agenda and just move forward with it, and ask and make sure that we continue the cry to be heard and to fight for our seats at the table, and to play the long game, and remember that the big picture is still moving in the right direction, especially if we don't give up.
I think that's spot on. Zora, do you want to jump in, and then I'll give Palasha the last word?
Sure. While it's really important to engage women in peace building and CVE, it's very important that we engage them at all levels. We design with them, we listen to them. We don't design for them, we design with them. We take their opinions, their views, learn from their experiences, and make it a person-side consultative. So it truly is designed according to their context, designed for them. So it's really more impactful. And I think it's very important that we engage women at all levels, be it parliamentarians, be it community women, be it teachers, students. We have to really engage everybody, and we can't leave anyone behind. As together, I think if we engage everyone in this process, and only then we can truly have peace and tolerance in the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Palasha, over to you.
Thank you, Megan. I think I would say international community before anybody else, or the U.S. government, they should stay in compliances with their own agenda. If you have Women, Peace and Security Act, apply that irrespective of what is the context. If it's Afghanistan or anywhere else, you have commitment, and you have to work on that and find ways how to work. In case of Afghanistan, I would say make women involved in every steps and political dialogue or discussion or engagement that you want to have regarding Afghanistan. Women should be involved in different level, and that's important, especially on the humanitarian issue. I think women should be considered as main driver of this aid to Afghanistan.
Thank you so much. I just want to express my gratitude to all of you for being with us, our panelists, folks in the audience. Really rich and interesting conversation. Lots of work to do. We have the tools. We have the agenda is fantastic. We've got laws and policies and plans. So now it's time to make sure they're all funded and to move forward in implementation process. So just really appreciate everybody today. Hope you enjoy the rest of PeaceCon and your individual days, and look forward to continuing this conversation moving forward. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.